This is the page of the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner. This story is about Paraguay, especially indigenous people. There's a picture of indigenous people. The title of this article on the United Nations Human Rights page is the In Paraguay Social Security create safety nets and build right for all. And it's published on September 26 this year. We want our fundamental right and our right to development to be respected, say Hipólito Acebei, who is the president of the Federation for Indigenous Peoples Self-Determination of Paraguay, has spent a lifetime fighting to improve the living conditions of indigenous peoples in South American country. Indigenous peoples in Paraguay face many obstacles to the enjoyment of their human rights, including poverty, discrimination, deforestation, disputes over land ownership, and the lack of social security protection. Despite social security being recognized in several human rights instruments, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it remained illusory for billions across the world, particularly for marginalized communities. In Paraguay, indigenous people lack access to basic needs such as adequate food, education, housing, justice, and health, which put at risk the achievement of most national and international commitment, including the Sustainable Development Goals. Under its mandate to address inequalities and promote economic, social, and cultural rights, UN Human Rights is supporting Paraguay's effort to adopt a social protection system that integrates human rights, alleviates structural inequalities, and generate sustainable growth. With funding from the Search Initiative, the office is working with the government, civil society, human rights institutions, and academia, providing technical assistance and analytical data and enhancing capacity with the goal of building institutional and financial capacity to ensure social security for all. Social security system contribute to eradicating poverty and inequality, promoting human dignity and social inclusion, and are key to achieve the sustainable development goals. Deep Buckle, chief of the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights section of the UN Human Rights. Weflu said that the COVID-19 pandemic and the global health and economic crisis it triggered exposed deep inequalities within and between countries, as well as decades of underinvestment in services essential to upholding economic, social, and cultural rights. Jose Galeano, a UN human rights advisor in Paraguay, said that while Paraguay has experienced a strong economic growth in the last 2 decades, such as prosperity has not been matched by adequate public spending on economic, social, and cultural rights for the well-being of all. Social protection requires greater resources to provide assistance and provide access to human rights, said Galeano decides only one potential scenario that should be reversed in order to provide social protection. Paraguay has the lowest fiscal pressure in Latin America, both in terms of direct and indirect taxes, as well as being one of the countries with the lowest social investment in the region. About 66% of Paraguay's indigenous people live in poverty, and 34.4% live in abject poverty, 3 times the national level. The illiteracy rate among indigenous people are 33.5%, while less than 1% have access to internet. Less than 4% of the indigenous people benefit from the state IPS social protection system. Galeano said this dramatic condition has structural causes, such as the low participation of indigenous peoples in political decision making bodies, persistent discrimination in the states, and the expulsion of indigenous people from their lands and resources. As a basic government should make sure indigenous people have to say and building more inclusive and prosperous societies. The traditional knowledge of indigenous people is very important. We can provide alternative for the recovery of nature and achieve the SDJ. Without the participation of indigenous people, it will be difficult to move forward, he said. Speaking during the 54th session of the Human Rights Council, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, said human rights economies measure success not by the size of GDP, but by the well being of all people. The basic necessity for life, education, health, decent work, social security, and adequate standard of living, freedom and hunger, and enjoyment of science and culture are not services or commodities, but human right to be enjoyed by all, Turk said. In Paraguay, the Search Initiative carried out human rights analysis of the social protection system, including a series of recommendations on social and fiscal policies to secure universal social security. Study is being used to engage with the Minister of Social Development to promote the extension of the government program VAMOS to segments of society that have been excluded, including indigenous people, women, older persons, children, and persons with disabilities. Working with academia, UN Human Rights in Paraguay also organized a series of workshops on social protections and human rights. I believe that the state should definitely invest more on social security system and in more inclusive way, said Oscar Diaz Aguilar, a teacher who participated in one of the workshops. There are segments of the population that are invisible. UN Human Rights created the Search Initiative in 2019 in response to rising inequalities, the slow implementation of the SDGs, and increasing social unrest. Its mission is to step up engagement at the country's and regional level of economic, social, and cultural rights and strengthens the link between human rights and economics.